There's a left internal problem of the social justice agenda, yes, but there's also outside, I think, reflex of conservative government, neoliberal government, whatever you want to call it, to turn the university into a job market training factory, which also has threats to the liberal arts tradition of the university.
Great. Wonderful to have you here, Professor Ian Brodie, with us at Deerhurst, where we at Macdonald-Laurier Institute are talking about political philosophy and defending the marketplace of ideas. Ian, we have 2 upcoming elections in Canada and the United States, and I think we've seen the fault lines in politics change over the past few decades, from economic issues about capitalism, socialism, and the role of government, to cultural and identity questions. And now we're coming, I think, to a time where many people are starting to question the role of freedom and defending freedom and democracy and our political values with renewed vigor. And so I want to ask you about you spent much time in government and now are within the post-secondary field. And I think it's fair to say we've seen much policy driven by ideological currents that are stemming from certain intellectual points of view, prominent among the intelligentsia and disseminated in the universities. And it's had a long trajectory post-1960s. And must, a change in this regard also have a long tail, or are there some things we can do right here and now to start re-emphasizing the importance of freedom and free speech in that dialogue?
Well, let me start just by saying the context at the university is a little bit different, or should be a little bit different from the context in society more broadly.
Right.
We're used to having, I think, a liberal arts ideal of the university where lots of profound questions can be asked, where lots of contrary viewpoints can be expressed, where we probably have a bit more tolerance of peculiar, even offensive viewpoints being argued. The discussion today about some of the discussion in the German universities in the 1920s and the 1930s, where even ideas that inspired the Nazis were tolerated, but they were tolerated. The argument was tolerated in the interests of allowing people to discover the truth through the many complicated ways that happens in the university. Universities have lots of ways of protecting themselves from the outside world in order to create space for that kind of conversation to go on campus. I think what the problem has become is sort of ideas of authoritarian or illiberal imposition of, we already know what the truth is and we just have to propagate it at the university, to turn the university into a propaganda organ, seeping into the university after it has already touched other institutions of our Western society, but as part of a broader range, as you say, since the 1960s, of kind of the politicization of institutions that used to allow for a broader range of debate. And now in the United States, I would say, and maybe in Canada, I don't know yet, I think that's part of what we're trying to sort out this weekend, it's a backlash against that in the political world, where political authorities are trying to reform universities from outside. I'm skeptical about whether that's a good idea or whether that's going to work, but I understand the impetus in some of the American states to create spaces inside each university where we can recoup the idea of liberal arts and of discussion about a broad range of ideas. If that's what we're trying to do here, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, excellent. Well, picking up on that point, you referenced the liberal arts and maybe a lost art in something, right? Cultivating the intellectual abilities, forming the character of persons through engagement with complex ideas, versus maybe on the one hand too pragmatically focused, kind of technical knowledge acquisition, or More troublingly, kind of viewing the person and their feelings and desires in need of service, and kind of teaching them the right things and keeping them safe from hostile ideas. So, and I think at the heart of this, we see different conceptions of what freedom is for.
Right.
Freedom is good in itself, and choice is good in itself. So it's an end. Maybe on the more feelings, desire, autonomous self side, or freedom as a means to freedom for excellence, freedom for discovering virtue and the good. And so what do you see in liberal arts education today? Do you see a need of recovery of one, or what are the trajectories that you see?
Well, on this front, I think there are two threads. I say threads. There are two sets of developments that we have to be very careful about that squeeze the space for liberal arts discussion on campus and are trying to organize it off of the university campus or out of existence. On the one hand, there's a movement from what we'll call the political left, the woke or social justice side, that wants to see universities turned into sort of instruments of social justice reform, where there's no need to discuss the great questions anymore. The idea is we sort of know the answers to the great questions, and now the time is to get on with active anti-racism teaching, or there's, that should be familiar to lots of people, but then there's all sorts of splinters away from that. And of course, they want to read out then the opportunity to have a discussion about what they're up to, questions about what is racism, what is anti-racism, are we erasing bits of freedom and liberty of thought here in an effort to pursue an anti-racist or some other kind of social justice reform. That's, I'm going to say, generally from the political left. On the political right, and too often the political right, in my view, I've been part of it myself over the course of many years, is to say, well, let's get universities out of those questions altogether and focus on job market preparedness. The purpose of the job market is just as instrumental, but it's not to aim at social reform and institutional reform and overhaul of racism, but it's to get people ready purely for the job market. So we have to have more engineering, more commerce degrees, more computer science degrees, and the kind of job market sense of it. And of course, that's part of the university experience as well. We want people to have a full life after they leave the university. That includes contributing usefully to society. But as you pursue that job market, I would say a short-term obsession about the job market, the kind of the greater reflective questions about truth, about engagement with the Western tradition, which is important to our society as well as important to our economy, gets left behind.
Right.
And so the opportunity for the liberal arts becomes smaller and smaller under both of those trends. And it's both of those trends that we have to be worried about protecting the university from, I think. There is a left internal problem of the social justice agenda, yes, but there's also outside, I think, reflex of conservative government, neoliberal government, whatever you want to call it, to turn the university into a job market training factory, which also has threats to the liberal arts tradition of the university.
Okay, that's excellent. Shifting gears a little bit here, the role of truth in politics and political philosophy today. You've just spoken about kind of this pragmatism, economic orientation on the right, and then a kind of extremeness or certainty about social justice outcomes on the left. And truth, it's being the relativism of truth. This is kind of being how many people have thought about it, instinctively for the past many decades. But I think there's a real hunger for it, especially among young people today, who haven't been told kind of, whatever you choose, it's fine, kind of respect everyone, but don't invest yourself too much in this or too much in that. And there's a real vacuum. I think you see people lurching to the left or to the right because of that, perhaps. And so what role do you think the pursuit of truth in education, and then as a kind of narrative or value to animate political movements should be?
I mean, there will be a small number of students we get every year. I think just at my university, the admissions office gets us, 7,000 or 8,000 students a year. They're very bright students who have come through, in my case, mostly the Alberta high school system. So they've mastered their grade 12 to the level where they've got their 82% average or whatever, and they get understand. That's great. Not all of those students are coming to the university to pursue truth in the esoteric sense of the term, and that's fine. I don't think there's anything new about that. This goes back to the beginning of university. You have students with lots of different orientations and lots of different, probably inherent capabilities. I think what's missing is that as you have the left social justice agenda of everyone comes from a group identity, we have to be inclusive of all the group points of view that might come of race, of sexuality, of different gender identities, and so on and so forth. There's a sorting of students into their gender and race identities, or the intersectional reality between the two of those, which can become a little bit, it's so easy to spoof this as you get into smaller and smaller gradations of all the intersections. But there is an argument there that we should be aware of all the different points of view which are possible, sure. And then there's a right-wing reaction to that of a sort of a tribalism of its own, that we have to stand for our, the other side of all of these intersectional identities. So what's missing is, I think, students come, maybe not looking for the truth. They might not express it that way, but they're looking for something that's universal in the human experience, that transcends, of course, there's people with different race experiences, people with different sex experiences, sure, of course, that's been part of human nature for thousands of years. But at a certain point, you're trying to look at what makes common between us, what makes it possible for humans from very different backgrounds to have a conversation, to have an argument or a debate about a course of action or a pursuit of truth, and then to act together in some kind of unity. That's a problem. It's not natural for humans to come to that kind of a sense of themselves left to their own devices. It's taken thousands of years of the Western tradition to figure that out. And I think we've eroded that aspect of the university education over the last maybe 30 years. And that's now come to the point where students can miss that. They come and they leave and they say, well, I got educated about what black women, black gay men or lesbians should think about this, that, the other thing, but that doesn't do quite justice to my whole existence as a human. And for students to finish 4 years and leave thinking, not that there's more to learn, but that in a sense I didn't really learn anything, that's a real shame, a complete waste of the experience, a complete waste of the time and the money that they put into it.
Okay, well, last question for you here, Ian. What can we do from a public policy perspective on post-secondary education, or K-12, if you have thoughts about that as well, to help foster this critical thought and this timely discussion?
Well, let me talk about the post-secondary side first, because the primary and secondary education is its own world, and I haven't spent that much time in that space except for my own kids. I think the first thing to do is for federal and provincial governments to stop making it worse by imposing on universities, EDI statement requirements, or trying to pretend that some things should be taught to the exclusion of other things. This goes to both sides, by the way. The idea that we should not teach about race issues or about critical race theory and so forth. Of course, we're going to teach that because that's part of understanding the pros and cons of all of these different modes of thought.
Absolutely.
I think that for provincial governments in particular, since almost all the universities in the country are creatures of provincial government or are heavily regulated by the provincial government, this idea that you can solve the problem of universities by focusing on the job market is wrong. There's obviously job market issues involved, but the idea that you can somehow tune the university to serve the job market to perfection, and then that will resolve all the problems, the ideological problems or academic problems on campus is wrong. And to start to hold universities to account for how well are you doing at introducing our best students. It's hard to get into university, at least as an undergrad. You're taking our best students, you're taking a pile of our resources and our time. How well a job are you doing preparing them for the common challenges of citizenship in the future, and for training the kinds of political leaders that we're going to require in the next generation? That itself is an issue separate from engineering, separate from the commerce programs, separate from the tech and artificial intelligence challenges. There is a more eternal and profound challenge there And I think it's incumbent on the provinces to ask about that too,
Yeah.
as they challenge universities for the amount of public support that they get, both in all the students that we get and in all the money that we get.
Well, thank you so much, Professor
Great.
Ian Brodie, Professor of Political Science and a former Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Thank you so much for being with
Great.
us and for lending your thoughts.
Pleasure to be here.